I think we will get started. Good afternoon and welcome to this global dialogue on existing building maintenance and inspections. Thank you for being here with us today. I know there are quite a few people registered for the webinar, for the WebEx. We're still seeing people signing on, but we'll get started because we have a limited time and I don't want to cut anyone short. So we will be recording this WebEx so others who may not be able to join us at this time may listen to our discussion at their convenience. You will also be able to access the recording from the ICC website. I'm Sarah Yerkes. I'm the Senior Vice President of Government Relations at ICC. I'll be moderating today's virtual meeting with my colleague, Mike Pfeiffer, Senior Vice President of Technical Services. Before I introduce our speakers, I have a few logistics I want to share with you. After we announced the West Palm Beach panel discussion, we received many inquiries from members and stakeholders who were very interested in participating and knowing what ICC planned to do to help provide resources. There was a lot of interest to participate in the discussion we had in West Palm Beach this past August, but it was not possible to include everyone. And as promised, we are hosting today's dialogue to share with you what we learned in Florida, and most importantly, we want to hear from you. We have an agenda, and I'll quickly review for those who may not be able to see it. It's up on the screen. You may zoom in. There's a function on the left side, I believe it was, that you can zoom in to see it better. In the first 30 minutes of today's WebEx, we will be sharing with you what we learned in West Palm Beach. You'll hear from folks who participated in the West Palm Beach panel discussion. We'll start with Mike Pfeiffer, our Senior Vice President of Tech Services. We'll go on to Judy Friedland, former City of Chicago Buildings Commissioner and Attorney at Law, followed by Bill Scalar, Florida Bar Board Certified in Condominium, Land and Development Law, then followed by Ken Rosenfeld, Director of State and Local Affairs, Building Owners and Managers International, BOMA, followed by J.Q. Wan, Executive Director of the National Institute of Building Sciences, NIBS, Multi-Hazard Mitigation and Building Seismic Safety Council. In the second half hour, we will invite 5 participants to share their opinions, recommendations, and suggestions with us. The speakers are Beth Culver from the City of Austin, and when I introduce them in the panel, I will give titles as well. But for the sake of time, we'll just name them and where they're from. Elaine Garrett, also from the City of Austin. Kelsey Ann Parolini from Southern California. John Adario from New York State, and Brad Shisher from Texas. The last 30 minutes will be dedicated to Q&A. We'll use the chat, the Q&A function, and we will try to answer as many questions as we can in the order we receive them. There are quite a few people registered for this WebEx, so it's just going to be very tough, possibly, to get to all the questions, but we'll do our best. So please submit your questions via the chat, the WebEx chat. We will answer again as many as we can. And just a few last comments. We will not discuss the cause of the building collapse, as there is an ongoing investigation being conducted by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST. And according to NIST, this investigation will likely take a couple of years. Our goal today is to hear your suggestions so we may collectively provide resources to support our members and stakeholders. Since we have an hour and a half, I ask that the speakers be attentive to their allotted times so everyone gets a chance to speak. And we have time then for the Q&A. Let us also remember what brought us to this discussion and keep in our thoughts the 98 people who perished in the Chaplin Tower collapse and the pain their families and friends live with over the loss of their loved ones. So let's go ahead and get started. Mike, I'm going to pass it on to you now so you can share with the participants what we took away from Florida and maybe touch on the property maintenance code, the protocol moving forward. What's the process for public review of the consensus document? Because as you know, there's a huge amount of interest out there and people are anxiously waiting to see what ICC is going to put out in what we're calling a protocol. So Mike, I'm passing the microphone to you now.
Thank you, Sarah. Again, Mike Pfeiffer. I'm responsible for ICC's codes and standards. There was an awful lot of very important details that came out of the West Palm panel discussion. That being said, my focus is going to be on more of the bigger picture items. I'll leave the details to the remaining panelists in terms of their thoughts and in terms of what they heard in West Palm. One of the first things that caught my attention was the need for a heightened and broader awareness of the need for periodic maintenance and inspection of existing buildings. That has become quite evident, not only at that panel discussion, but as we've been working with the state of Florida on a potential guide for their utilization. Companion to that is the need for education and communication. You know, most people, they always think when they think of the codes, they think of initial construction. They think of the development of construction documents, the need for inspections. So what do they focus on? They focus on the International Building Code, the Residential Code, the Fire Code, and the PMG codes. The real issue, though, is you're not done when the C of O is issued. That's where the role of the IPMC or a similar code comes into play. The IMPC, International Property Maintenance Code, has numerous provisions specifically dealing with what they characterize as unsafe conditions, predominantly on the electrical side, the utility side, and the structural side. So it's a kind of an awakening for most people in terms of, you know, what do we do when we have an existing building? And that's where I think education and communication, such as we're doing today, are going to play a very important role going forward to hopefully avoid what occurred at Surfside. The panel in West Palm was the first step which led to multiple drafts developed by ICC with public input for consideration by the state of Florida. That's an ongoing activity. In terms of on the national side, and specifically the next steps, ICC is planning on developing a guide for use across the United States as well as internationally. The process, as Sarah indicated, will include ample opportunities for input, participation, and public input as we develop this guide. The guide will be regulated by one of our council policies, which identifies the protocols for developing a guide. The reason we're going the guide route is it's a more expeditious way of getting a document into the hands of the AHJs in the states and the locals prior to what we anticipate to be the development of an ICC standard in accordance with our ANSI accredited procedures. So with that, I wanted to keep it brief, Sarah, in order for the other panelists to have an additional time to discuss their views.
Thank you, Mike. So next on my list is Judy Friedland, and Judy is the former City of Chicago Buildings Commissioner and an attorney and has quite a bit of experience in the area of building maintenance and inspections. So Judy, give us your perspective, if you would, please.
Yes, of course. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where everyone is. Thank you for allowing me to be on this panel. I think that what the biggest takeaway that I had from the conference that we had on August 17th was how important it is for each jurisdiction to have an ordinance or a statute or any type of whatever laws you pass in your jurisdiction on the books that mandates what we have here in Chicago. And that is that if an architect or an engineer is at a property for any reason, and they observe a potentially dangerous and hazardous structural condition, that they are mandated by law and their license is at stake to report it to the local building official, building department, commissioner, as it was in our case, within 24 hours. And then that building official, building commissioner in that jurisdiction have the authority by law to require an immediate critical hands-on examination of the area. So even if you're in a jurisdiction where you have to do a report every 5, 7, 2 years, whatever it is, if there's a condition, that building official has the authority to ask for that report right away. Because there's no way that inspectors can be everywhere at all times. And often engineers and architects are at buildings for various things. Maybe somebody wants a build out, maybe there's some maintenance to be done, maybe they want to do a build out somewhere. But if that engineer or architect sees something, they have to say something by law. And I can tell you as building commissioner, that happened regularly, that we would get calls from architects and engineers and emails saying, we're at the site, this wall looks unstable, we're concerned about the floor here, the structural integrity. And so we would immediately send out an inspector, and then we would ask for a report. And I'm sure that saved a lot of lives and a lot of property and so forth. So I think that if there's a takeaway, is that if there's building officials on this call, go and check your books and make sure that you have that, because that's going to help you a lot immediately while we work on these other issues that we're all working very hard towards providing.
Thank you, Judy. That's very important advice, and coming from your experience, very valuable. Next on our list is Bill Scalar. Bill is with the Condominium Law and Policy Life Safety Task Force and recently issued a report in October. So Bill, will you share with us some of the recommendations in your report? You come in with a different perspective, so I think it'll be very interesting to our participants to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. Our task force embarked on its mission within a week of the tragedy at Surfside. And as Sarah mentioned, delivered our report to the governor and leaders of the legislature on October 12th. We were not focusing on causation, but similar to the discussion at the West Palm Beach conference, we're looking at ways to mitigate and prevent the tragedy at Surfside. In that regard, our report focuses on what I will refer to for ease of discussion as TRIM: transparency, reserves, inspection, and maintenance, in a reverse order. Of course, our findings were that more than 60% of the existing 1.5 million condo units in Florida are already over 30 years of age. And with the exception, as everyone knows, of Miami-Dade and Broward County, where there is a 40-year recertification process, which its implementation is somewhat inconsistent, although it is on the books, and there are diligent efforts in light of Surfside to implement it on a more regular basis. This is left to chance in the remaining parts of the state, meaning 2.2 million residents do not have a maintenance standard or an inspection standard under Florida law. So what have we recommended relative to maintenance? There are 13 items in our condominium statute, 13 building components, such as structural, electrical, mechanical, elevator, roof, etc., pools. And for each of those, we have recommended that a maintenance protocol be established by a structural engineer or architect by the end of 2024 for all buildings of 3 stories in height or greater. For all new buildings, that be a requirement for developers to prescribe that maintenance protocol along with what's known as their turnover inspection report. The need for a maintenance protocol that we are all focused on, a maintenance protocol that exists in commercial, in public buildings, even in rental market buildings, because there are lenders, private equity, and investors involved, but not in residential condos left to the well-intentioned management of volunteer boards and their management consultants. Second, inspections. Rather than wait 40 years, or has already been enacted in the city of Boca Raton, 30 years, Palm Beach County, it's being considered 25 years east of Interstate 95, 35 years west of 95, and many other local governments. We recommended an inspection by a structural engineer, a comprehensive inspection of those 13 items beginning 5 years from the turnover of that condominium. So within the next 5 years, yes, there will be an expense, but there will be a comprehensive engineering report of those 13 components to be updated each 5 years thereafter. Reserves. The 800-pound gorilla, as we've discovered in the room, because the funding for deferred maintenance and repairs. We recommended an overhaul of our reserve statute to make it more difficult for unit owners to waive reserves. They still can, but for each dollar they waive or reduce reserves, they must provide an alternative funding mechanism, such as a line of credit. We discovered banks are readily willing to give lines of credit well secured by condominium assessments. PACE programs that are used for hurricane strengthening, government subsidized low-cost programs where instead of a $50,000 or $100,000 special assessment, an individual owner can qualify on an income means-based test and get financing, $30, $40 extra a month instead of paying a special assessment for that essential deferred maintenance. Also an expansion of the reserves to the 13 items already in our statute, including a percentage of structural. And finally, transparency, and very important, and it's already been alluded to. When an inspection report that will be mandated is obtained within 10 days, it must be furnished to every unit owner. It should be posted on the expanded use of websites or secured portals for condo associations, and copies of it should be given to local government officials to be kept as a repository. Miami-Dade is considering, for instance, posting those on a given page on the property appraiser's website, so one can have disclosure. We've obtained support from the Realtors Association for such disclosure so prospective buyers can see those reports. So TRIM, transparency, reserves, inspection, and maintenance. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Bill. And for the participants' knowledge, we are going to make your report available for download. And I just have a quick question, Bill. Have you had any reaction from the state to your report?
Yes, we've had meetings with the Secretary of DBPR, which regulates not only condominiums, but contractors, architects, engineers, the professions. And there is support for a maintenance standard. There is support for increased inspections. There's still debate whether that will be a statewide standard or left to local governments. We understand that's typically something that may be mandated by ordinance and counties and cities. And we're expecting a bill to be introduced into the legislature by the beginning of the next session on January 11th to encompass some, probably not all of these, because our report goes much further into other areas such as insurance and other types of disclosures, but we expect a legislative initiative to be introduced before session begins on January 11th.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Bill. Next on the list is Ken Rosenfeld. Ken is with BOMA. He's the Director of State and Local Affairs for Building Owners and Managers Association and was one of our sponsors in West Palm Beach. So Ken, welcome. And what are your takeaways and what are you hearing from your members?
Well, thank you, Sarah, and thank you to the other presenters and everybody joining today's call. So BOMA did serve as one of the co-convening organizations for the August symposium that was with ICC as well as with NIBS, and we really appreciate that partnership. It may be interesting to some, of course. BOMA represents, we're the association for the commercial real estate sector. We represent property professionals who own or manage office buildings in all parts of the commercial sector, and that does not include condominiums. And in some ways, the environment that our buildings operate in can be very different from condominiums. We were sometimes asked, why do you want to get involved in what happened in Surfside? But BOMA, of course, has been around a long time, over 100 years, with a very long history working for building safety. So we very much wanted to be part of this conversation, and we'll continue to be. As far as the symposium, we were very pleased with how the right organizations came together, the right people were in the room, understanding that it was just a start, as Sarah pointed out. We put together one of the panels, and we were very pleased with how it came together. We had leaders from the property management side, from JLL and from Colliers. We had the National Apartment Association represented, so we had that perspective of residential buildings, as well as several building officials joining our panel. Essentially, given the existing codes, the existing inspections, we wanted to share some background on how that system worked, right? Once you get to the real world, once people are implementing the systems that are on the books. And I think it was very helpful to share some of that background. I hope everyone agreed, particularly related to inspections, right? It's good for folks to know that properties are not waiting 30 years or 40 years to inspect their buildings, whether that's because it's a best practice in commercial real estate, or in many cases being mandated by investors, mandated by insurers. So there's a whole system of inspections in place. But again, I think the right issues were brought up. BOMA as an organization is not taking a position on the protocols or the report being recommended by ICC, but as an industry, commercial real estate is very open to the discussions about inspections and maintenance and where improvements can be made. And we can tell you we very much appreciate the good work being done by ICC and Sarah and Mike and Bill in putting together some very thoughtful recommendations. What we did following the symposium is put together a white paper. We felt that our best contribution would be in assembling frequently asked questions related to the building collapse. We were getting questions from not just our Florida members, but from across the country on what do we know, what do we not know yet, what should be done, what are state and local governments talking about related to this issue. So we tried to assemble some of those issues into a short 4-page document, how this issue relates to codes, how it relates to inspections, how it relates to insurance, and so on. So please take a look at the document if you can. It's available on the BOMA website. We've also shared it with ICC. And as you might imagine, we also used that document and the event in general as a reminder for commercial properties. It's a good reason to review your maintenance and inspections processes. It's a good reason to review your emergency preparedness issues and plans. It's a good reason to take a look at best practices from ICC and ASCE and other organizations. So we're hearing that people are doing that. So I'll stop there, but I do want to be sure to thank ICC and Sarah and Mike and Dom and everyone on the team for the work they've done and will continue to do. And thank you for everyone who joined today's call. And please do remember to turn to BOMA International or the BOMA local associations in your city if there's anything we can help with. There are 86 local associations, so if you're not involved in your local, I'm sure there's one nearby, and let us know how it can help. But thank you, Sarah.
Well, thank you, Ken, and thank you to BOMA for being such a great partner. And for those who don't know, BOMA is a founding member and strategic partner of ICC, and we really enjoy the close partnership and collaboration between our organizations. Thank you, Ken. Also a sponsor of the West Palm Beach panel discussion was the National Institute of Building Sciences, NIBS. And with us today, we have Dr. JQ Won, who is the Executive Director of the NIBS Multi-Hazard Mitigation and Building Seismic Safety Council. So JQ, what are you hearing from your members?
Thank you, Sarah. So first, like Ken said, I want to thank ICC to take leadership. Also thank ICC for inviting NIBS to be part of the conversation. Before I started, for those who don't know NIPS, I want to share with you, NIPS was established by the Congress to ensure that all the areas of the built environment work together, to utilize the best technology and focus on the sustainability and the resilience when creating the place where we live, work, learn, and play. As Sarah mentioned, I'm the Executive Director for the Multi-Hazard Mitigation Council, MMC, also the Building Seismic Safety Council. So we do hear a lot from also our members, our industry leaders under our councils. So some of the points I shared today, also from their contribution, I want to thank our members for contribute to this conversation. So I'm going to use my 5 minutes here to share 3 points here. So the first is try to answer questions sometimes we hear a lot, especially from reporters. After the Surfside collapse happened, is our building safe? So I want to say that clear and loud, for the new buildings that are designed and constructed following the ICC code and the national standard, the latest standard, are safe. I don't think that will be a normal case for what happened in Florida. So we have the confidence the code will serve the purpose. And we also would strongly encourage all those jurisdictions to adopt the latest code if you haven't yet. While today's discussion will mainly focus on the maintenance and inspection, we do want to reinforce that I-code should be the starting point. And we do want to reinforce that the importance to have a very good quality management system. So using code from Charlie Carter, our BSSA chair, inspection can only find quality that is there, but cannot add quality when it's not there. So I want to again reinforce that the model building code and a good quality management process should be our starting point. Make sure we have good standing buildings. So for my second point, I would say we would support to have more proactive inspection programs that are practical and enforceable, as a previous panelist has been talking about for the inspection maintenance. In the preliminary report shared by ICC, it recommended the annual maintenance inspection, periodic or milestone inspections. While we are still waiting to know what happened at Surfside, I think we should be cautious here to understand that milestone inspection, either at 40 years or 30 years or the 10 years or whatever frequency, most likely that won't prevent this from happening. At least for now, we don't have the data to support that will help to prevent such disaster to happen. However, we do support that there should be more proactive inspection programs. Here, I want to make some clarifications between the maintenance inspection versus the engineered assessment. So for the maintenance inspection, that will be the main focus for today, would be more rely on the in-process actions, including things like cracks, water infiltration, door window racking, the observations, the observable things in both technical form, also in the form that would cause a non-technical people to know there is an issue that will trigger more in-depth analysis. So we support the more discussions and potential improvement to look at all those protocols on the maintenance inspections. Also equally, if not more importantly, the follow-up actions or the regulations, when the issues are identified, like Judy mentioned, there should be mandate for the engineers to report that issue. There should be action being taken. That it should be, if not more important, it should be equally important. Also, I want to just to make the differentiation. So that is maintenance inspection. When we talk about engineered assessment, which is the next step, when we know there might be issues based on the maintenance inspection findings, based on, this is an old building that may embody some weakness because that was designed based on a code 10, 15 years ago, right? So when we know there's potential issue, we may start engineered assessment, which for those issues you will not be able to find in a regular maintenance inspection. That's a big difference there. Just make sure everyone understand there. So the engineered assessment is a kind of beyond the discussion of today. But again, we do want to get your attention. There's difference between maintenance inspection and engineered assessment. Also want to mention that these are also the areas NIPS is looking into, how to address the potential vulnerabilities of the large existing buildings in our country, also our aging infrastructure. So we can have more discussion with that. So my last point is about the documentation records and also public education. I think the previous panelists also mentioned this. If we are able to establish a more proactive inspection program, do what we discussed today, we need to think carefully how to document the findings. So the engineers, building owners, may use it for year-to-year comparison to monitor what repairs has been done or other useful purpose. So I do like one of the analogy brought up in our August panel discussion, the in-person panel discussion, which is to have a Carfax for buildings. To have the maintenance, repair, condition assessment records, which every information is available there. So the owners, renters, buyers, property managers, all the related stakeholders can make informed decisions. So this will be my last point, and I look forward to more dynamic discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you, JQ. And thank you to all the speakers who were part of this first part of our WebEx. We're moving now to the next session, and I'm very pleased and honored to introduce to you the folks that requested time to speak. They registered to speak, and we're going to start with Beth Culver from the City of Austin. Beth is a building official and assistant director for the Development Services Department. So Beth, the floor is yours. Tell us what you're thinking, your comments, recommendations, concerns, whatever you have in mind.
Thank you for having me here today. I'm going to share what our processes are for the City of Austin. And also thank you for the panelists who've already spoken, as the information you've provided is invaluable to us. As many people know, Austin's skyline is changing rapidly. That's no secret. As one of the fastest growing cities in the country, we're staying very busy as our skyline continues to evolve. The national standards are important to cities like ours because they provide a baseline, essentially a foundation on which to tailor our local code amendments to build our communities safely. These standards, or the proposed guidelines mentioned, also help us with some level of consistency between jurisdictions. Regardless of how many buildings are added to our skyline, we must verify that the new structures are safe and comply with code. The City of Austin, we follow national code standards and the city's land development code to help ensure building integrity from design through construction. For the City of Austin, building safety is a partnership among multiple departments, and two of us are actually represented here today. The Development Services Department, we review plans, issue permits, and perform inspections. I'm the Assistant Director for Development Services and serve as a city building official. We also work closely with several partner departments throughout the development process. And we have departments who respond to complaints and ensure compliance after construction. My Austin Code Department colleague, Elaine Garrett, will speak more about that department's role in a few minutes. While we have different roles in the process, we also support each other. We share expertise and we share information as needed to support code compliance. Discussions like this today are important for all of us, regardless of our geographic location or our role in the development process. So guidance such as that from Judy Friedland and the protocol discussed by Bill Sklar can help inform our local regulations. We all need codes that make sense, and those continue to change with new materials and new lifestyles. For example, many of us are seeing more condominium communities in our jurisdictions. This type of development raises a number of questions related to property ownership, liability, governance, and facility management. Putting those issues together in the code community will help us arrive at more sound code recommendations. Currently, Austin does not have a code that calls for routine inspections of existing structures. However, we have many checkpoints in our plan review and inspections process to verify building integrity. As is typical in U.S. cities, a building permit is required before constructing, altering, or improving a building or structure in Austin. The process of requiring a permit includes an extensive plan review process where we focus on protecting life, health, safety, welfare, and property. So my role as the city building official is to oversee those activities. Large commercial and multifamily structures typically require multiple permits in our jurisdiction, each with specific inspection requirements. In addition, in 2017, the City of Austin established a dedicated structural review team. This team examines some types of projects for public safety issues and sound engineering principles. The program focuses on select project types that have historically posed structural concerns. We have licensed engineers that perform the structural reviews before construction. And this is a high-level review for code compliance. It is not considered a detailed peer review. We begin with a geotechnical report and complete set of sealed drawings from a Texas registered engineer. All of those drawings must include relevant codes and information about material properties such as structural components. Applicants must provide a thorough range of relevant information, and the review focuses primarily on design assumptions, overall load paths, and structural stability. Our department also conducts a range of inspections before, during, and after construction to verify standards and approved plans are followed. Inspection requirements are defined during the plan review process. We follow structural inspection requirements established by the International Building Code and the material standards it references. Our city also oversees third-party inspection processes, and when specific expertise is required, we use the special inspections process defined under the 2021 International Building Code. We require design professionals such as engineers and architects to submit their statement of special inspections. The statement identifies the inspections that are needed, and then the contractor submits reports confirming they've been completed. And then after a structure has its certificate of occupancy, inspection responsibilities for this construction shift to our Austin Code Department. So I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of these discussions to determine our steps forward in addressing existing buildings as we explore the challenges and responsibilities that we all share for building safety.
Thank you, Beth, very much. And now I'll go to your colleague, Elaine Garrett, also with the City of Austin. Elaine is the Assistant Director of the Austin Code Department, excuse me. So Elaine?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to participate in the webinar. I'm glad to be part of this communication, and a lot of the information that I've heard so far has been very valuable to share with everyone. As the Assistant Director for the Austin Code Department in Austin, Texas, I oversee the inspectors that conduct the inspections out in the field. Our inspectors conduct both residential and commercial inspections. We work extensive hours so that we can reach out to the communities after hours. And if there is an emergency after hours call out, we do have after hour call out teams that address those types of situations that occur. If anyone is unfamiliar with the Austin, Texas area, we have a population of just under 1 million. For the service areas that we have, we service over 1 million in complaints. That includes our ETJ. This, in the last 10 years, our area has seen a 21% increase in population. This growth has increased the demand in the construction industry. So we're seeing more and more construction occurring here in Austin, which is causing some major challenges for us as well. Recent major corporations moving in, as you may have heard, are Tesla and Samsung's expansion. This increase has proved to be challenging for our inspectors. Much is due to the increase of the high-rise structures and the mixed-use zoning that are competing with many of the older neighborhood districts that have older structures that are over 40 and 50 years old. The older residents with older homes are seeing the need for repairs, and they need specific type of requirements for those. Our department is a proactive department, seeing our call intake increase. So we see these as major challenges when conducting any type of proactive inspections. We've had over 28,000 cases that were complaints that were called in the last year. I think just like everyone else on this call, our purpose is to work towards protecting the life, safety, and health of our community. through code regulations of minimum standards that are set. We maintain, or we attempt to maintain, a balance between code compliance and code education. We do this by responding to community concerns and identifying those dangerous conditions and substandard conditions and implementing programs to ensure that these minimum standards are met. One of our responses are to be reactive. We are not entirely proactive at all. We respond to complaints that come in from the community. We have some programs that do have reactive inspections, and those are those that are in some of our licensing programs. And we have a repeat offender program here in Austin that we do proactive inspections. This program entails structures that have had a lot of complaints and that they are repeat offenders. It is based on an ordinance that was established. It's a residential, it is to ensure that residential rental properties in the community are safe and they're maintained in accordance with public health, safety, and property maintenance standards. Our repeat offender program properties have to have a criteria where they fall into. It's considered a 252 criteria. For those structures, if they've had 2 or more separate notices that are dangerous or impair habitability within a 12-month period, they fall into that program. If they've had 5 or more separate notices, regardless if they've corrected the measures timely, they fall into that program within a 12-month period, or if we've issued more than 2 citations. Currently, we have 84 properties in this program. In general, we respond to our complaints based on a priority code, a priority level. Our inspection process is outlined in policies, which we find that is what helps us keep up with the times and keep up. We learn from other agencies, we learn from other departments, and we find that as you review and as you train, you find that you keep up with that and you try to stay ahead of it, right? We focus on fair and equitable enforcement on the codes. We have varied response times. So if we receive a structural condition that has had a major violation occur, and a lot of these are emergency after hours conditions. This could be anything ranging from a vehicle crashing into a car, a vehicle crashing into a home that causes structural integrity issues, or it could be right after a fire that causes extreme structural conditions. Our response time to those is within 1 hour. We have then the minor structural problems, and we have up to 3 days to respond to those. But we do create a priority level so that we're able to respond to the most extreme faster and quicker, and that we're able to provide safe conditions by securing the areas. Once we do that, we immediately try to notify the owners quickly so that they'll come out and either maintain the security of the property and that they'll let us know what is their next action plan so that we can get, if the structure is unsafe, we can get something moving on that fast. We try very hard to work toward a compliance, but when that doesn't work, our next step is to move toward a legal process. And that legal process for us is to take the structure or the building owner to what we have is called a building standards commission. That commission will issue an order either to repair, or even it could be as extreme as asking for demolition of the property. Even though we are complaint driven, our main approach is first to educate the community. And we find that is real valuable in us in being able to educate and how to assist with identifying problem areas in a structure or a condition. Right now, our uniqueness in our communities is that we have a wide, diverse area of the city, and there are independent code concerns for each different neighborhood. Some of our examples of our proactive education formats are, we have specific design outreaches such as safe at home projects, property inspection tips on an inspection guide for managers, homeowners, landowners to understand what to look for in their property that could be causing problems for their structure. We have a summer ready program. And so what we've also taken lessons we've learned from what we've all suffered for winter storm events to move forward and educate others on how to have safe weatherization preparation for their properties. We find training is essential. It's an essential component to ensure consistency in the interpretation of our codes. Our industry is a continuous learning experience. We want to make sure that our personnel are well educated and have the latest information and updates from all the code perspectives. I'd like to end thanking each of you for your time and look forward to the rest of the discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elaine. You provided a lot of great information. I thank the City of Austin for reaching out to us and for you and Beth being here talking to us today. Thank you. Staying out west, we're going to Kelsey Ann Parolini. Kelsey is the president of Structural Engineers Association of Southern California. Kelsey.
Hello out there, and thank you, Sarah, for that introduction. And thank you to ICC for allowing me to be part of today's discussion. As Sarah indicated, I am the current president of the Structural Engineers Association of Southern California. As some of you may be aware, California does not have a building recertification program like that in Florida. Therefore, our local building departments are responding to concerned community members with a different set of resources than if a mandatory building recertification program were already in place. For us in California, the first public response from government leaders to community members concerned came in late June. The Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors approved a motion regarding the assessment and safety of high-rise buildings in Los Angeles County. Specific to the practice of structural engineering, the motion directed the Department of Public Works to investigate 2 points. The first being the feasibility of requiring a certification inspection program for all similar type high-rise buildings to that of the Champlain Towers South. And second, to require owners of certain buildings in select areas to hire a structural engineer to prepare an engineering assessment. The County of Los Angeles Building and Safety Division, which is within the Department of Public Works, invited 3 groups to work with them as they prepared their response to the Board of Supervisors. These 3 groups were the Structural Engineers Association of Southern California, the California Building Officials Structural Committee, and the building department officials from neighboring jurisdictions. The department's report is due to their Board of Supervisors later this month. Although I cannot speak to the contents of the report itself, I'd like to share recommendations that we made to the County of Los Angeles, as well as those included in a position paper by the Structural Engineers Association of California to assist California jurisdictions as they contemplate structural condition assessments. Some key points made in these recommendations are, first, that we support a more proactive implementation of existing regulations, especially those based on maintenance inspections. Existing regulations that we have available to us include the California Existing Building Code, much like the IEBC, which defines unsafe and dangerous conditions and requires their abatement. We also have the California Health and Safety Code, which defines substandard building with the extensive list of unacceptable conditions. And third, the IPMC, which we've heard about a little bit already, which is available for our local California jurisdictions to adopt. The CIAC group advises using the 2024 edition of that code that is available. Another point made in our recommendations is that mandatory periodic and milestone inspections have not been determined to be warranted based on the performance of California buildings or by shortcomings in existing California regulations. Plus, mandatory periodic and milestone inspections pose a number of technical, logistical, professional practice, and legal issues. For example, what constitutes similar buildings? Buildings may be similar in terms of age, height, use, occupant load, or location, but from a structural engineering perspective, these don't necessarily indicate similar vulnerability to damage or collapse. By focusing on just one of these characteristics, such as building use, the public may interpret that other building uses are not at risk. This is a concern for us. Another example, the terminology used to define assessments can be confusing to the public. The terms certify and recertification specifically can be misleading regarding the level of evaluation and analysis being completed. Also, the term certification poses an issue when it comes to engineering liability. If you would like to dive further into these points, these recommendations will be shared with you in a follow-up email by Sarah and her team, or you can find them on our website at www.seaoc.org. Again, that's www.seaoc.org. Thank you again to ICC for hosting this very important conversation and inviting me to share a California perspective.
Thank you, Kelsey. Very valuable information. Thank you. And yes, we'll make sure we share your recommendations, and I'm sure we'll be reviewing them very carefully as well. We're learning here from you all. We've heard from a state on the Gulf Coast, California, the Pacific Ocean. Now we're moving east to the Atlantic coast. We have John Adario. He is the director of the New York Department of State Division of Building Standards and Codes. And so, John, I know you've had a very keen interest in this subject, and we are really looking forward to hearing what you have to offer us. John?
Yes, thank you, Sarah. As Sarah indicated, I'm John Adario, and I'm the Director of Building Standards and Codes for the state of New York. I'm very happy to be included in today's meeting and also be included in the panel discussions held in Florida back in August. As a brief background on the codes in New York State adopts a statewide code that is enforced within 1,600 local governments across the state. The only exception is New York City, which maintains their own code. New York State has been adopting and enforcing 9 of the international codes, including the International Property Maintenance Code, since 2002. So we've been adopting the codes for about 20 years now, the international code. So the New York State Fire Prevention and Building Code Council, which is the governing body over the state codes, has established a building assessment work group to discuss and research the topic of building assessments for New York State and to determine the best options for the state going forward. So the Codes Division staff and the work group will be closely monitoring and studying what Florida and other states and local governments are doing regarding building assessments and any changes that may be made to local codes and regulations in the future. New York State would also be very interested in any supporting documents that ICC is developing and any additional guidance that may be made available by ICC to assist states in making an informed decision. So I would like to thank ICC for taking a leadership role in this endeavor, and I hope that ICC will continue to facilitate these discussions and share any information with states as it becomes available. I would encourage ICC to continue to lead the discussion and continue to assist states and local governments with reviewing their options. So thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, John, and thank you so much for always being such an engaged participant in the model code development. As we all know, it's what you all bring to the table that makes our model codes as good as they are. So thank you to all. Okay, so we're going back to Texas now. Next, we have Brad Chisher. He is the chair of Technical and Code Committee of the Structural Engineers Association of Texas. Brad?
Hello. I too would like to thank everyone for their different perspectives. I find it fascinating, the different angles everyone approaches this issue from. I want to start by saying I think JQ made an important comment that there should be a distinction between an engineering assessment or a structural assessment versus maintenance inspections. Those probably should both be a part of the conversation, but it's important to recognize the difference there. My comments are primarily related to engineering assessment and wanting to provide engineered perspective. Much of this is similar to what Kelsey spoke on, but I think important elements as this process is developed is defining who's the credentials for those performing the assessments or the inspections, whether in either scenario, so that that's clear who should be doing this, what those qualifications are. I think it's also going to be important to have an established means of reporting, so that it's clear that these assessments aren't just going to the building owner. There needs to be some teeth behind this for it to be effective. So those assessments, I would recommend that those reports be required for submission to the building officials, and that the building officials be empowered in some way to ensure that recommendations are either followed or in extreme cases that the occupancy of the building could be impacted. With that kind of empowerment, there also needs to be a well-defined process to remove judgment from the process as much as possible. Standardized forms, criterias, a tiered approach. I'd seen it in one of the questions asking about selective demolition. How far are you going? I think there's guidance in some existing model codes, ASCE 41. There can be a tiered approach where you're doing observations and assessing condition at kind of a base level. If that identifies problems, then you might take it to another level where there may be some selective demolition, and then maybe that goes on to establishing some testing requirements, where some material testing may be warranted. But a tiered approach, as the issue could potentially escalate, would be how that would be a way to address that concern. And again, removing judgment from this process is going to be important. One of the points I really want to drive home is it's going to be very important that we don't create a situation that makes the practice of engineering hostile. We don't want to create a hostile environment for professional practitioners. Creating a duty for design professionals to identify potential problems outside of work that they're engaged to perform is very concerning. It could make engineering practice uninsurable in some areas if we're not careful to mitigate those potentials. So I think it's very, very careful it's very important to be careful that we don't create rules that are going to place a duty on design professionals that isn't that can't be reasonably achieved. I think well, Bill spoke to the kind of the direction things are headed in Florida, and that's why I am speaking to the potential for these engineering assessments, because I think that is a direction that a lot of jurisdictions are going to want to head. Both JQ and Kelsey mentioned that there isn't actually evidence that those assessments are going to be effective, but certainly there's public interest in them, which is the basis for my comments. I did want to kind of provide that framework. And yeah, I like the the trim. I think that in combination with well-defined credentials and a well-defined process are going to be important for making this process have teeth and to be effective at improving public safety, which I think is what everyone's interested in.
Brad, thank you so much. This is all excellent information that we're getting from all of you. We really, really appreciate it. And look how good you all are. 2 o'clock, right on the dot. You guys are awesome. So we are ready to get into the Q&A, and I know there have been quite a few comments and questions pop up. My colleague Jacob Carson is going to read some of the questions, and then I think I'll just assign it to whomever I think is best to answer that particular question. But feel free to raise your hand and let me know you have something to add to the answer. So let's go ahead and get started with the Q&A. Jacob, do you want to go ahead and give us the first question, please?
Thank you, Sarah. First question. How do you suggest implementing a maintenance and/or inspection standard in a county that has no adopted building code or no enforced building code?
Oh, I think I'm going to give that one to Judy Friedland. Judy, as the building commissioner, how would you handle something like this?
So I was busy typing an answer to somebody's question. So could you just repeat the question for me?
Sure, Jacob, could you just repeat it, please?
Yeah, it's how do you suggest implementing a maintenance or inspection standard in a county that has no adopted building code or no enforced building code?
Well, I think that the first thing they need to do is work really hard with the ICC and get themselves a building code. And I think that's what the ICC is there for. And they would be very happy to, I think I speak right, Sarah, that the ICC would be thrilled to work with that jurisdiction to help you implement a building code and standards. And that's probably the first thing that you would have to do, and go to your local legislators and get that introduced and passed. Because without that, there's really not too much that you can do. And, and I think that as buildings get older and we hopefully see more construction coming along, we need these codes to provide us with the framework so that we can go forward and make buildings safe. So I strongly suggest that you talk to the leaders in your community and reach out to the ICC, and if I can help in any way. And if you're a smaller community that maybe doesn't have high rises or whatever your specific situation is, I think we could all work together to tailor something to your needs that won't create a lot of unnecessary regulation for buildings that you don't have. So I think we could tailor something and work with you.
Absolutely. And it sounds so good when it comes from one of our governmental members. This is why we're here, the Government Relations Department. We are happy to work with any jurisdiction to help adopt, review, adapt, and implement any of the model codes that we put out. So if the person who asked the question can contact me, syurkeys@iccsafe.org, I will put you in touch with the government relations representative for your area, and he or she will be very happy to work with you to ensure you adopt codes and can manage the implementation administration of those codes. Next question, Jacob.
What is a reasonable period of time for someone to correct a violation? At what point would you take someone to court to pursue a demolition?
Okay, well, I'm going to ask Judy to answer that one as well, if you don't mind, Judy, because of your background in enforcement of codes in Chicago.
Yeah. Well, in Chicago, we have a very good system of enforcement. We have two places where we do enforcement. One is the Department of Administrative Hearings, which is more an administrative setting where we don't really put dangerous and hazardous conditions. And the only remedies that we have are orders to comply or fines. The other is circuit court. And, in Chicago, back in 2001, I set up an exterior wall call specifically geared towards high rises that had issues after we had a piece of terracotta fall in our central business district. And in that court call, we put in all our buildings that are usually 5 stories or higher, or big, theaters and so forth that might have structural issues. And we put them in this court call, and it's every Wednesday at 2 o'clock. And we have a system to get our cases into there, and we do the enforcement. We do get critical examination reports. They are reviewed. Those are some of the questions I've been answering in the comments. You do have to have someone to review them. And if there's major repairs to be made or dangerous conditions, then our inspector will go to the property, write up those violations, send them to court, and then it goes in front of a judge. And then, of course, it depends. The inspector is going to testify how dangerous it is, how long it can wait. If it's a condo building, as Mr. Sklar knows, that's a whole other production of getting the funds for that. And so, but you have a judge in charge, and the judge is going to be making the decisions about how long. And the other good thing about circuit court is that if a building doesn't have the funds to do the work, they can appoint a receiver to step in the shoes of the owner and make the repairs, and then they put a lien on the property and figure out on how to get paid later. The court also has the jurisdiction to vacate the building if it gets to that far, or even to demolish it if that becomes necessary. But usually by having people send these reports in, every 2 to 5 years, and our reporting mechanism that if an engineer or architect sees something dangerous, we put it into court. The earlier you catch it and get it into court, then you can have a little bit of time to work it out. When you leave it till the very end, when it's about to collapse, then your choices are very limited. So I think it's better that when you have, especially high rises or buildings that house more people, right? So public places, theaters, you put them in court and let the judge take over and issue the rulings and go from there. And then people can, of course, work together. A lot of times the city will have an expert or their inspector, and the owner has one, and they sit down, and a lot of times things are figured out as engineers, and you find the most cost-effective way to resolve the problem, because you don't want to be overly burdensome, but you want to be safe. And so those are engineering problems, and sometimes value engineering comes in and you figure it out. It's better safe than sorry.
Thank you, Judy. Next question, Jacob.
Will the ICC consider publishing the next International Property Maintenance Code sooner than 2024 to aid in the efforts discussed?
I think that's a Pfeiffer question. Mike?
I think in response to that question, Jacob, which is a very good question because it's about timing, that's why ICC is currently pursuing, as I indicated in my opening remarks, the need for a potential guideline. Because again, it's a more expeditious process for those who believe time is of the essence. You heard Mr. Dario from New York State talking about, working with ICC and that need. So I think there's going to be opportunities in that regard. Whether or not it needs to be a formal production or publication of earlier than a 2024 IPMC, we can still publish a guideline for which the jurisdictions, be it mandatory or not mandatory, can adopt. So there are opportunities for ICC to put something out there which don't necessarily have to be tied to the IPMC. Clearly, in the event when we do publish something, I would envision that it would be included in some way, shape, or form in the 2024. But we want to get something out prior to the 2024 IPMC.
Thank you, Mike. Jacob? Did we lose?
Is there any evidence that education for repeat offenders results in more proactive voluntary improvements by owners?
Okay, repeat that again, please. It was a little garbled in the beginning.
Is there any evidence that education or the repeat offenders program results in more proactive voluntary improvement by owners?
Okay, Ken, do you want to take a try at this question?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm not sure if the question is related to a specific program, but I can tell you we're at BOMA, we're very much in favor of education, right? It sounds a little bit like common sense, but There's going to be a lot of debate about different types of inspection programs and what works and what doesn't work. But we feel very confident in saying that the more that professionals can assist building owners and building management in saying, here's what works, here's what doesn't work. That's what everybody wants to see. And we brought it up in West Palm Beach. We're going to keep bringing it up. I think the educational side is sometimes overlooked. If you're a large property, if you're a large company managing a big portfolio, you probably don't need a lot of help. But there are plenty of smaller properties, smaller companies that could use some best practices and advice. So not sure if that exactly answers the question, but we're going to keep hammering that home, that I think there's more that can be done to share information, share best practices that doesn't necessarily cost a lot of money on anybody's part. We'd like to see that be one of the outcomes.
Thank you, Ken. I think I'm going to ask Bill Scalar as well to weigh in here from his perspective as an expert on condo association.
It just so happens that separate from the Surfside tragedy, the Florida Bar identified with our Division of Condominiums, our state regulatory agency, in April of this year, the need for a more robust education requirement. And we embarked on a joint effort that's now in its fourth program, having to do with governance, the duty to maintain for not only board members and leaders of condominium associations, but inviting owners to participate. Now, it's growing as we speak, and there was a program that occurred just yesterday. So I certainly agree that education is a key component. It's education of all the officials, and it's a multi-modal education where the local building officials, the managers involved, state officials or government officials, the regulators are involved in educating owners and their governance that here's what needs to be done. There needs to be a protocol, there needs to be an inspection standard, and learn and not only teaching, but hearing what they have to say. We have also found the vast majority of Florida condominiums are probably anecdotally well maintained and well managed, but the absence of a uniform standard as exists, as Ken talked about under BOMA, for office buildings, as exists for industrial parks, as exists for other commercial properties, and even market and affordable rental projects, is just leaving it to chance. So we are educating, and it's going to become more robust and more objective in terms of standardization.
Thank you, Bill. Jacob, next question.
ICC, please elaborate on the schedule for the development of the guide that was mentioned and the opportunities to participate in the development.
Is ICC participating? Is that the question?
No, it's ICC, please elaborate on the schedule for the development of the guide and opportunities to participate.
Mike, that's one for you, please.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Jacob. In terms of the guide, I anticipate getting a draft out there and available probably probably in January of next year. So in a month and a half, and then we'll be putting together again the different protocols in accordance with our guideline development process. So again, the bottom line will be on the lookout for BSJ news pieces that come out on Thursdays typically, or a bona fide ICC news release that tells what's going on. The first step will obviously be get a draft out there, get it posted, and then have the guideline committee take a look at it, massage it, do what they need to do. In terms of an end game, it would be nice to have this completed by the end of the second quarter of next year, possibly 6 months. That may be a little bit a little tougher to achieve, because I do anticipate, and I thought we saw some very good responses from both Brad as well as Kelsey on the structural side. Myself being a structural engineer long time ago, there are some issues that need to be reconciled. The issue of liability, site specificity, the point raised about the fact that you can't treat all buildings as similar buildings. You've got to treat them based upon their vulnerabilities, the credentials, the qualifications. So I do anticipate public comment on the draft to take a bit of a timely process. So I anticipate, given the nature of this effort, we're going to get a lot of input.
Thank you, Mike. Jacob?
Yep. So as a follow-up to this question, a few different people have asked this, that JQ, Kelsey, and Brad have all mentioned a distinction between maintenance inspections and an engineering assessment. Is ICC considering splitting the guide in any way to deal with maintenance inspections as separate from engineering assessments?
I think
I'll
that's for
take
you,
that
Mike.
one again. I'll take that one again, Sarah. And yeah, those are excellent points. In terms of, again, keep in mind that we're just starting the process, but that's something that we heard that also at the panel. We heard it with Surfside. We've also heard that in some of the deliberations that have occurred from one of the committees at the Florida Building Commission. So that is something that needs to be looked into in terms of how do you slice and dice this? Because clearly a structural assessment is a heck of a lot different and more involved than some kind of a maintenance inspection. So the points are well taken.
Thank you, Mike. Jacob, ready for another question?
Yep. There are currently many testing and maintenance standards in regard to fire protection systems. Will these life and safety fire protection inspections and reports be considered in the overall effort by ICC?
I guess that's, I'm on the hot seat for that one as well. As a matter of fact, one of the panelists in West Palm was from the fire service, and he talked about the need for fire inspections and maintenance inspections. But so that's also something, if you take a look at our fire code, you'll see that a lot of local jurisdictions and states are currently do that. So I guess the point to be made here, Jacob, is nothing is off the table in terms of what we would call the scope. By way of example, Bill noted the certification program, recertification program in Miami-Dade. Well, that's limited currently to basically structural considerations and as well as electrical. And in their electrical, they get into a little bit into fire alarm systems, just a little, they touch upon them, but those are the two main focuses. So in terms of scope of the ICC document, again, that's going to be a TBD in terms of what is the need out there, and at the same time acknowledging what's currently out there. And when it comes to fire inspections and routine annual and periodic inspections, that's something that most jurisdictions, at least my understanding is, are currently doing right now.
Thank you, Mike. Jacob?
One's actually going to be for me, but it's I see this presentation as being recorded. If so, will it be made available for all attendees to access? There's a lot of good information being shared. It would be great to be able to share with colleagues. The answer to that is, of course, yes, it is being recorded, and we will be posting it on the ICC website after the call has ended and we've got time to parse it. So I wanted to let everyone know that. Next question for the panelists. Most structural defects may not affect the outside of the building. They are on the interior. How are these inspections conducted?
I think I'll ask our guests from Austin, Beth or Elaine, you want to answer this question?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Regarding after the impact for Austin Codes enforcement are asked to go out to look at it. What we do is we try to gain obviously access to the interior part of the location. Our complaints, as I said earlier, they are reactive. So pretty much they've called us and they called us for that condition that's occurring. So they allow us in. When we have a situation where we receive a report where it may not be the individual who owns that property and we're not allowed in. Sometimes we have to go as extensive as obtaining an administrative search warrant, but those are rare occasions.
Thank you, Elaine. John, do you want to add anything to this answer from your side in New York?
I gotta apologize. I was typing in another. Looked like I had a question directly to me, so I was answering that question as.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
Okay. Sorry, John. I'm surprising you by pulling you guys in to answer questions, but I think it probably is of interest to the participants to actually hear from some of you out there in the code enforcement arena. John, I'll ask Jacob to repeat the question.
Okay, thank you.
The question was, most structural defects may not be visible from the outside of the building, instead they are on the interior. How are these inspections to be conducted?
I am an engineer. I'm not a structural engineer, I'll be honest, but I think, in my opinion, from what I'm talking to engineers, they would be able to tell if there was some issue with a building, rather than doing invasive research. So I think that would be the first indication that they would need to do something with the building or look into it further. But looking at signs of racking or something with the building that maybe they would have to look a little bit closer at. But I don't know if in all cases it would be something where you would have to remove interior finishes in every case. But I don't know if that's helpful.
I can speak to that if you'd like a little bit.
Yeah, Brad.
Yeah, typically there is evidence either in finishes or evidence of some type of movement or other things that we look for in what is visible that would then warrant further investigation. And that's why I talked about having a tiered approach, because your first step is going to be looking at what you can see. And if you're seeing something that warrants further investigation, that's when you start writing specifications to have a selective demolition come in and start uncovering things to take a closer look. And that's typically how we do that. That's something that I've done quite a bit in my career. And those have covered the spectrum from it was no big deal to we demoed the building. So that's how that's typically handled.
Thank you, Brad. Very good. Good answers. Hopefully it will help the folks asking these questions. Jacob, another question, please.
Yep. We are moving through these pretty quickly, so please use the Q&A feature to submit them. Someone asks, what training is required for the inspectors in Chicago's jurisdictions?
Okay, that's for Judy. Judy?
Sorry, could you just repeat that? You cut out, Jacob. I'm sorry.
What training is required for the inspectors in Chicago's jurisdictions?
What training you said?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. So what we have, the inspector, the inspector that's assigned to our exterior wall court call that I mentioned before, and that reviews the reports is an architect. So we have a few architects that we've hired as inspectors. They're not all licensed, some are, some aren't, but they have the training to at least read a report and understand what they're looking for, and to understand when they go out to the property what to look for, what's bowing, what's areas of concerns, the cracks that they see. And so that's how we do the exterior wall and the structural inspections in Chicago.
Thank you, Judy.
There's a follow-up to that, which is, I'm sorry, I just lost my place. How long does it typically take to get issues that have been identified resolved if the owner is not responsive?
So I just saw on the Q&A, I think that one of our city inspectors actually jumped in and made some statements on there. And so he's absolutely correct. He's very good. So, read the comments. I'm not going to reread them now. So would you repeat that one more time? Jacob, your question?
Yep. How long does it typically take to get issues that have been identified resolved if the owner is not responsive?
Well, you have to go to court. And if the owner's not going to be cooperative at all, sometimes we go to court and the owner's, somewhat cooperative and they may be working on hiring a contractor and so forth, but we still go to court to make sure that it gets done completely. If you have an owner that is not cooperative, it can take some time. You have to serve the owner. You have to get court orders for them to comply. If it's an emergency situation, the city can ask for a receiver to go in and make the emergency repairs even before the owner is served. So it's all very dependent, and I think Mike mentioned it earlier. Every building is different. Every ownership is different, and you have to be able to be nimble and you have to be able to be flexible to deal with the situation at hand. There is really no one size fits all approach. You have to really, get into the weeds of the ownership, the building, what it needs, what the income of the building is, how you can get that problem solved.
Sarah,
Jacob?
also, Sarah, if I may, before you go to the next question, on the subject of training / qualifications, in terms of state statutes, depending upon the state, some statutes get into some of the details. By way of example, in Florida, in light of Surfside, they've actually have a qualifications for what they call a special inspector for what's called a threshold building. Again, this is for new construction. Now, how that translates to an inspection of an existing building would need to be worked out, but a threshold building in the state of Florida is greater than 3 stories or 50 feet in height, or which has an assembly occupancy which exceeds 5,000 square feet and more than 500 people. And in these Florida statutes, they get into some of the parameters to how to be qualified as what is called a special inspector. So there is opportunities out there to glean from, again, in this case, it's Florida statutes, what's out there in terms of how to assess qualifications, how much experience you need to have doing actual inspections. Clearly, you want to have the design and experience, but then there's the inspection experience, especially when somebody's mentioned that question, how do you inspect something that's covered? And I did like Brad's response, was a lot of times it's become somewhat self-evident based upon cracking, movement, and things of that nature. But sometimes it's not. But maybe there's a suspended ceiling that you can remove some tiles. So it's something to look at in terms of when getting into qualifications.
Thank you, Mike, and to all who answered this question. Jacob, this will be the last question, so give us one more and then we'll do the wrap up. And Mike, I will turn it back to you after I do my own wrap up for you to share any last thoughts with the folks participating today.
Very good.
Jacob?
Yep. Where recertification reports are required in Florida, is the building official required to review and accept the report?
Okay. Mike, do you know from all the discussions you've heard?
I do know that a report is required to be submitted. That was one of the things that came up in the panel discussion in terms of the responsibilities of the code officials. Because a lot of the concerns that were voiced in West Palm were who's going to do the work, and what should the building official, the code official, do with the inspection report? Are they obligated to approve it, or are they just going to hold it in a repository? Those are the types of questions that are still somewhat ongoing in terms of the role of the building official, especially in light of, and this is somewhat similar to the question was asked of Judy, if you even don't have a building code, well, you don't have a building department. But if you got a building department, do you have the horsepower? Do you have the resources to be able to, for lack of a better word, approve? But it does say that in the recertification, I'm looking at Miami-Dade's, it says the recertification report shall be submitted to the building official prepared by a Florida registered professional engineer or architect, and it must be signed and sealed by the engineer or architect of record. That's just an excerpt from the notice of required certification from Miami-Dade.
Let me just add to that, if I may. What we found in the forums I've participated in with the Miami-Dade and Broward building officials is the duty is upon the owner and to hire the engineer. In the case of condos, the board or management hiring the engineer. The engineer prepares the report. The scope is limited, as Mike correctly said, really to structural and electrical in the case of Miami-Dade. And then there may be, depending upon the certification and the checklist that's submitted, a uniform checklist, an inspection, which is noted to be a non-engineering drive-by inspection by personnel of the local building official. Unless there's something that indicates there is a life safety condition or an imminent threat to life safety, the building official will not conduct an assessment or inspection, as the case may be, relative to that property if there is that certification by the engineer or architect provided and nothing noted as far as a life safety condition. And this has been an issue relative to having more robust and uniform standards for the review process of the recertification that's currently being reviewed by the Miami-Dade County Commission and its technical subcommittee, as well as in Broward too.
Thank you, Bill. Well, this has been a real interesting 1 hour and a half, and I wish we had more time. We could go on, I'm sure, discussing this very important subject. I want to thank our speakers and all who joined today. This is a very important topic, and I think everyone that participated today, everybody on this on the panels and out there in the audience, we are all committed to finding solutions that will work so we don't see any more of these catastrophic collapses of existing buildings. And we also recognize here at ICC that there's not a one size fits all. We are committed to developing solutions for our members to opt or not to opt to use, hopefully to opt to use, to adapt to their particular climate, geographic areas. And I think collectively, we will develop the right solutions. We've got a lot of good information today. We're going to review some of the other Q&A that has come in. We don't have time to answer all of them. And then we'll try to put out a briefing paper or an article or something addressing some of the other concerns and questions that were raised, and we'll try to answer them. I want to also share that we're going to do a series of webinars. Dr. S.K. Ghosh is planning to do a 4-part webinars series, and this will be for CEUs on Surfside, Florida building collapse of June 2021, and ACI 318 building code requirements for structural concrete. The first one will be January 5th from 11 a.m. to noon Pacific time. The second one will be January 13th from 11 to noon, also Pacific time. The third webinar will be on January 20th, noon, again, the same, 11 a.m. to noon Pacific time. And the last in the series will be January 26th, also from 11 to noon Pacific time. This series of 4 one-hour webinars will focus on 3 main areas of improvement in the ACI standard for concrete design and construction, and indicates how compliance with the enhanced requirements would have been beneficial to the performance of the building. The 12-story condominium building was likely designed in the early 1970s, Florida Building Code and ACI 31871 or ACI 31877. Concrete durability, flat plate, punching shear, and structural integrity provisions of ACI 318 are critical areas of improvements that engineers, architects, and building officials must be familiar with for safe performance of concrete buildings. So we will also, I'm sure there's going to be plenty of announcements on these webinars out there, but for those of you who are interested, please look for the information and register to attend. And again, on behalf of Dominic Sims, our CEO, myself, my colleague Mike Pfeiffer, we thank everyone that joined and my team, our ICC team, who's supporting us in this WebEx. And for the last words of wisdom, I'm going to turn to my very wise colleague, Mike Pfeiffer, who's going to be the man of the hour. And I'm sure all of you will want to become very good friends with him as he moves forward with the development of this global protocol. And I say global because we have received a lot of inquiries and interest from outside the United States as well. So we are trying to provide something that will be a ready-made solution, adaptable, just like the model codes that we put out. Mike?
Thank you, Sarah. I don't know about the wise part, but I want to first and foremost, I want to thank you for putting this together. Sarah she did all the work to put this webinar together, her and her GR team. So thank you for that. And I'm just going to basically reiterate that ICC is going to move forward with this guide. We want to get something out, like I said. If we can get it done by the end of the second quarter next year, again, that may be optimistic, but this is something that's important. And as I indicated in my upfront comments, there's a heightened awareness, there's a heightened need, and I think people are very much interested, but we got to do it right. And I like the idea of the tiered approach, site-specific approach. But again, stay tuned. We will provide adequate notifications of what's going on and how to get involved in this process. So again, thank you. I don't know, Jacob, if you can tell us what the final number was, but I know at one time we had over 1,000 registered. So there's clearly an interest in this topic.
641 attendees.
Thank you, Jacob.
Thank you. Thank you all again very much. Happy holidays to all. Be safe and continue to stay engaged and provide us your intel, your knowledge, your skills, your expertise. Bring them all to our model code development. Thank you again, and stay tuned. More coming your way from ICC. Goodbye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Nice job, Sarah.
Thank you, Mike. Great partnering with you. Got to do more of these informational webinars.
Can you do it from Portugal?
Sure.
All righty.
For you, from anywhere.
All right. Y'all have a good day.
Bye-bye.